Hello, I'm Andre Beaudry, Executive Director of CMC, and I'd like to welcome you all today to our second virtual National Town Hall, a forum titled Building Canada's Cooperative Economy. An important piece of information before we begin is a mention that today's forum will be recorded and that we have simultaneous interpretation services in English or French to assist you. Please select the language of your preference by simply clicking on the planet icon at the bottom of your screen. Je vais maintenant parler en français.
I'll now speak in French. Hello, I am Andre Baudry, General Executive Director of Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, and I welcome you to the second National Virtual Assembly of CMC, a forum titled Building Canada's Cooperative Economy. This meeting will be recorded and we have simultaneous interpretation for you in English and French. You can select your preferred language by clicking on the planet icon at the bottom of your screen. It's a pleasure to welcome today participants to our national conversation. And we have a diverse community of small, medium, and large cooperatives and mutuals, as well as social purpose businesses from across Canada to offer their voice, their spirit of innovation, and their commitment to build a more cooperative economy. From the board, the team, thank you for being here today for this important conversation.
I'd like to share with you that when my team, our facilitators, and myself reviewed the list of participants for today's event, we were really struck by the incredible diversity of participants in terms of the small, mid-sized, large cooperatives, mutuals, social enterprise organizations from every region of Canada participating today. And we're thrilled to have you with us to share your vision, your spirit of innovation, and your passion for how we can build a more cooperative economy in Canada. At CMC, our vision for the future of the co-op mutual sector is that we achieve at a much faster pace our economic, social, and political objectives. But to accomplish this, we need to engage, to communicate, and to cooperate as a national community. Individually, we're a model. Collectively, we become a national community of 8,000 cooperatives and mutuals that can be sustainable catalysts for economic as well as social change in Canada. So on behalf of my team and our board of directors, I'd like to thank you for being here with us and for lending your voices to this important conversation. Among the almost 140 participants registered for today's event, I'd like to recognize the presence of the Honorable Senator Lucie Monsion, former president of CMC's board of directors, and certainly a tireless advocate for a more cooperative economy in Canada. I'd also like to recognize the participation of my counterpart, Roz Henry, CEO of Cooperative Business New Zealand, who's up very early this morning to join us. So thank you, Roz. Your co-facilitators today will be John Kay, CEO of Realize Strategies and board president at CMC, as well as Sid Vino, CMC board director. It's now my pleasure to turn our event over to John Kay, who will kick things off.
Thank you very much, Andre. Welcome, everyone. And my thanks to the team at CMC, to my colleague Sid Vino, and everyone today for being part of this important conversation. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that CMC's head office is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, who have been occupants or the stewards of this land for millennia. I myself am based in Vancouver on the unceded traditional territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It is an honor and a privilege for all of us at CMC and in the cooperative sector across the country to live, work, and play on these lands that we now call Canada. In terms of today's rollout, as Andre said, this is intended to be a national conversation. It is our hope that the ideas and the stories that emerge from today are lessons learned that can be shared and heard from coast to coast to coast. So we have structured this event to be highly interactive and really encourage everyone attending today to be an active participant. If you would like to participate, please use the raise hand feature or type your questions or comments in the chat section. We may not, of course, have time to get to all of them, but we will monitor them and take them into account as we go forward. I've seen a few people putting into the chat a land acknowledgement, so please do feel free to do that to acknowledge the land that you currently join us from. So I'd like to now turn over to Sylvie to lead our first discussion. Sylvie?
Oui, bonjour à tous. Très
Yes, hello
heureux.
everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. So I have the pleasure to launch things and start things off with quite a big question. So the question is this: what are the external challenges or pressures that will influence or that co-ops and mutuals will face in Canada? Obviously, we are aware that we need to be more visible, to have obviously the impact during the pandemic that we have, but what other pressures, what are the challenges will co-ops and mutuals have to face? So this is my first question. I know this is a first question and you need to be quite courageous to break the ice. So who would like to go first? I have Benoit with his hand raised. So Benoit Caron, please go ahead. Can you hear me? Yes. Sylvie, well, first, hello everyone. Benoit Caron in Quebec from the Co-op Expertise and Resources Consortium. This is quite an interesting question because we have many challenges ahead. What are the big pressures we have? Well, I think that we are very much focused on the year that we are going through, obviously the health crisis currently. And sometimes we may forget that before today and tomorrow, we are facing an aging population, a labor market with pressures, and another challenge is that there will be a tomorrow after a post-crisis, and we will need to rebuild part of the economy, part of the social economy. There will be also great opportunities for cooperation, for cooperatives, in order to meet all of these new needs, to address new opportunities. So workforce, aging population, and post-crisis. In my opinion, those are three pressures that we will need to face in the future. These can also be seen as large opportunities and ways to maybe move ahead faster than we would have done it otherwise. Yes, indeed, Benoit. I think this crisis helps us to move faster or to enact change faster. And Turcotte, also raise your hand at end.
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour, Hélène.
Yes, hello. Just like Benoit mentioned, I will talk to the challenges, but I would like to also touch upon the international global scale and bring it down to a local scale. For those who don't know me, Eden Turcotte, consultant in development of co-ops. I've been active in the sector for over 10 years. Globally, yes, the pandemic accelerated projects. I was active with an agricultural co-op that wanted to export in the US. The values bringing us together brought us to say, well, we'd like to connect with businesses with similar values, because this is how we can grow together, we can move ahead and move forward. And I've heard people in Iowa saying that, well, with regard to soybeans exports to China, should we not be allied to Europe and face challenges together? So yes, we are facing global challenges with regard to food, And in a more rural, or I'm in the eastern townships here in Sherbrooke and Quebec. Local food, we need proximity, grocers, producers, and farmers who need to be well compensated, and consumers and the people in the town need to have access to products. So distribution networks are facing a lot of challenges that really emerged during the pandemic. So locally, we also need our elected officials to believe in our model that is too often not well known. Thank you, Eden. That's very interesting. We are taking note of this. Also, Philippe Boissonneau would have something to say.
Oui, bonjour Sylvie et bonjour tout le
Bonjour,
monde.
Hello, Sylvie. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone online. It won't be too long. With regard to financial co-ops, we tend to say, well, we have an aging population. We want to reach out to young people, and we tend to say, well, young people have the same values as co-ops, but that are not necessarily members of co-ops. So I think the big challenge, if you want to ensure sustainability, is to do everything in our power so that the values that we have and the values that young people have can converge together, so that they can realize as soon as possible that our co-ops reflect the values that they hold so dearly. And I think that's still a big challenge. Yes, excellent. Yes, that's a good point here. Young people expectations with regard to cooperative values, yes, that they reflect to them that those are values that we share, that are part of co-ops and mutuals. We have also Gary Lavoie. Please go ahead, Gary. Hello, Sylvie. Hello, everyone. I think one of the challenges we have, one of the very important one in this generation, is aging population, yes, but also generational transfer of businesses. A lot of studies are conducted, obviously, in Canada. I think we're all aware. I know that in Quebec, the number of businesses that will be transferred is huge. And in some cases, the generational transfer will not take place because the next generation does not necessarily want to have these businesses. They will be sold and very often bought by investment funds, foreign funds, and there's a possibility of losing assets from businesses that will be delocalized coming out of towns, cities, and whatnot. So I think we have a fantastic opportunity. The way that the movement has grown, we have expertise in several sectors in the economy. What is lacking? We have also a lot of solidarity finance that has been developed in the last few years. However, we need more of it. Projects are emerging, obviously. We try to develop this, and investment funds that would help to take action quickly when businesses go on sale. Best deals are usually sorted out very soon, and we need a tool to develop in the sector to be able to quickly take action and purchase what we call purchase funds to convert into co-ops. And I think this is a golden opportunity right now, and the movement needs to put forward these types of initiatives. An example is being developed right now in the national capital in Quebec City, but also through CQCM, there's a willingness to have this tool. And I think through Canada, that should be something where all partners, even in financial side, should be more involved. I didn't really introduce myself. I'm sorry to do this, but Gary Lavoie, also a member of the Solidarity Economy case and chair of the board. Okay. Do we have time for a question now? Asking for my co-moderators. John, do we go to, we have a lot of raised hands, so that's great. We're really going through all the challenges. Obviously, many of the same, but maybe one last. Renaud Boisvert. So going with the order that I have here. So please go ahead. Can you hear me? Yes. Renaud Boisvert. Hello, everyone. Director of a few student co-ops in Quebec. With regard to consumer co-ops, what I've noticed in my short experience in the sector is that we tend to see institution and the initial momentum we had to create co-ops was lost, and we associate large financial co-ops or large co-ops to banks, to other businesses, and we are not able to communicate, to talk about the cooperative difference, which explains to me why young people are not tend not to be members. Also, in the written text, we tend to limit non-co-op businesses. We tend to be very isomorphic to professionalize governance, and we see that type of history, such as the MEC story, where we imitate inks. Okay, great. Well, I think we'll stop there for this question. I know there's other hands that are raised. I can't really give you the floor right now, but we'll move to a second question, very much looking from within a business and looking into what would be the biggest source of internal pressure. So what has been done from within internally? What limits potential for growth of mutuals? So what is internally there and based on co-op principles? We've seen events recently thinking about MEC. This is one example. Jason Rivet has his hand up. You have the floor. Yes, hello everyone. Jason Rivet, part of Young Emerging Cooperators. Personally, I think that a lack of tool and training on governance limits the potential of our mutuals and cooperatives. Too often, large mutuals and co-op groups have the resources to develop training, to send their representatives and to external trainings, but smaller co-ops do not necessarily have these tools internally, or if they do, it's on a paid basis with expensive trainings to the federation and whatnot. So from then on, we reduce the potential of education of co-ops with regard to governance and the board, and even some board members. So we also limit the potential for knowledge with members who could have some expertise, but who are not necessarily attracted or do not necessarily have the right tools to develop our model. I think that's one of the source of pressure that we have internally, one of the major points. Yes. Okay, education, yes. Principles on governance, essential. Now, Marie-Josée Paquette, CQCM. Hello, thank you, Sylvie. If I can piggyback off of what Jason has just mentioned, and your introduction to the second question, you know that there are new cooperative business models that have been emerging lately, and we'll have the ones also being created. This is, if there's something good that was developed through the pandemic, is this desire to work together and to find common solutions to society issues. These new cooperative models, well, there's going to be a certain vigilance so that cooperative governance sticks, so that it's integrated to these new models. So an awareness to the values and principle. I think there's a risk. Anything gaining in popularity has the risk of losing its nature. And even though there's a lot of good support in Quebec, well, leaders, directors, well, there's this risk of losing sight of the cooperative values. As Jason just mentioned, there's an importance to in educating about governance specific to co-ops and mutuals and organizations like CQCM, a promotion education organization has a role to play, just like CMC has a role to play to ensure that these emerging models are more powerful and that this momentum, this co-op momentum that started in their business growth is still present. Yes, and I also mentioned that governance consultation table for members obviously is one place where members can work together. There's a whole curriculum or board members, governance, and mutuals and cooperatives. And this is really an answer to address this concern. Yes, I'm seeing a lot of messages in the chat. Obviously, we know that you're there. We see a lot of discussion. It's great. Now, maybe I'll just move to Colette Lebel from Solio.
Oh, j'avais pas activé mon micro, désolé. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous.
Hello,
Donc,
everyone.
moi, oui, ça rejoint un petit peu les dernières interventions, mais ma préoccupation.
I agree with the previous members here, but now with regard to all of employees, we know that currently baby boomers, all that the employees that have been there for a long time will be either left or will be retiring, and we know that the young people don't stick as long in businesses. So I think there'll be quick education needed, an efficient education that is needed, because cooperation is a learning, right? And we talk about having a good culture and cooperative businesses. Well, I think that is a risk in the future. Okay, maybe just going back to in the chat, people are supporting. Well, we started more with an external perspective with regard to acquisitions. We talked about acquiring businesses, transforming businesses to co-ops, and I think this is really a concern. It's seen everywhere. Might be a solution. I like to hear solutions. It's fantastic that we can share those live. I would already maybe turn to John, the questions that you might have.
Yeah, I'm happy to turn to the question, Sylvie. It's an interesting one and one that we all grapple with to a great degree. How do we go about attracting and retaining new members to our cooperatives? And how do we also particularly reach into youth, new Canadians, and individuals who come from traditionally underrepresented communities? And just to set a bit of interesting context before we open the floor up, if we look into CMC's database right now, we have identified 109 Indigenous cooperatives, 84 cooperatives in newcomer racialized communities, and 40 women-focused cooperatives. So how can we as a movement collectively increase that number over the coming years? So very much looking for hands up now. I think Daryl Reed.
Command 4. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Daryl.
Okay, thanks. I teach at the University of British Columbia in the Okanagan, where 7% of our students are Indigenous. I should say previously I taught in Europe for a number of years. I'm also the president of a campus-based cooperative. And for a number of years, I was the head of the Canadian Association for Studies in Cooperation, our national research association. And as head of that, I actually led a task force on CMC on the need for co-op education. And what struck me most about that going in and coming out is that we do not have a strategic plan for engaging with higher education. We had that task force, a document was published. I didn't really hear anything about the results of that. So we do not systematically engage with universities, which is in sharp contrast to conventional businesses. They all want to be on universities. They want to sponsor programs. They want to sponsor chairs. They want to sponsor students. They're engaged in the entrepreneurship centers, which all universities have. We don't do that. I should not say anything for Quebec here, I think, which is a different place where they may do that. So by way of example, this year I taught a course which was nominally on not on cooperatives, it was on nonprofit organizations. But in that course, I gave students the opportunity to do a business plan for a nonprofit or for a cooperative. 85%, which was over 90 students, chose to do a business plan on a cooperative. They were delighted with the opportunities. They were really engaged. But if I hadn't sort of corrupted that course and transformed it more into a cooperative course, these students would have gone for 4 years through their education without learning anything about cooperatives. Now, many of them have great interest in it, but it's only by happenstance because we do not do this. In the past, we've had sporadic efforts to do these things. In Manitoba, for example, they had a great program where they initiated share and cooperative studies, which actually got courses on cooperatives into business schools. That was one initiative, which was not, it's still sort of going on, but we don't systematically do it. We don't engage students in terms of their existing courses. We don't find ways to get them involved, even if we can't provide new cooperative educational programs. For example, we do not have a national competition, cooperative case study competition. Why don't we do that? Business students love case study competitions. It looks great on the resume. They get really excited. We don't have that. We don't have competitions for cooperative business programs. So even if we can't get into the classrooms of all these students, there's lots of things that we can do. And we don't strategically look at universities if we want to reach Indigenous students like mine now, where, as I say, we have 7% of our students are Indigenous students. They're very interested in these types of issues. So until we develop a much more strategic approach, we're going to not do very well, I think, in terms of getting the next generation out there. And the other part of that is actually having students see cooperatives on university campuses and work with existing campus cooperatives in terms of governance issues, in terms of mentoring them, but also as business partners. We struggle, the cooperative I run markets fair trade and organic t-shirts. We struggle to get cooperatives to listen to us. The universities have been good, bookstores have been good in helping us develop projects, but we don't think as a sector, how do we set up a cooperative that's going to deal with promotional materials? How can we collaborate on that and do these things? So I think until we get a much more strategic approach to how we engage university, how we engage those people who are most likely to become entrepreneurs in the future, we're not going to go very far or very fast.
Thank you, Daryl. And speaking as a longtime board member of the Provincial Association in BC, I can say it's, I think, a challenge for us and a challenge for many provincial associations across the country to engage with universities and colleges at the leadership level. But I agree with you entirely. It is an imperative. And if there's a bright spot, as if I recall correctly, in the state of Wisconsin, teachers there are required to take a course in cooperatives in order to obtain a license to teach. So perhaps there are some things we can also learn from our colleagues in the United States as we try to fulfill this quest to have tighter relationships with post-secondary institutions. I'd like to now call on Victoria Morris from the Saskatchewan Co-op Association.
Thanks, John. So hopefully you'll speak up if you can't hear me. I think that most folks are probably familiar in terms of things that are being done. The youth camp programs in several provinces, and in Quebec, the Cooperative Jeunesse de Service program is also quite popular. And things like the Cooperative Jeunesse de Service program, student-run credit unions, in terms of younger members, I think have been demonstrated to be really effective because people get a hands-on experience. One other thing I would mention that we're working on right now, it's not released yet, but we're working on a teaching manual for newcomer agencies to use with students in both their language and their business and employment classes, to do the same thing we've done with schools materials to teach newcomers about what co-ops are and how they work, how to become a member, and if they're interested, to take it to that next level, to create a co-op, to build connections and get to know people in co-ops. So yeah, we're really excited about the newcomer work. We're also going to be developing one for young newcomers as well, because yeah, we think co-ops are a great solution for newcomers, and there isn't that we've seen so far a lot out there like that. So if anyone else is working on that and wants to chat about that, we'd be happy also to compare notes. Thanks.
Thank you, Victoria. It's great to hear of the work that you're doing in Saskatchewan, and again, a model for many of us to look at and try to emulate. Next, I'd like to call on Etienne Fouquet. Etienne, are you there?
Vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me?
Est-ce qu'on m'entend?
Oui.
OK.
Okay, yes.
En fait, je m'appelle Étienne Fouquet.
My name is Etienne Fouquet. I'm doing a PhD on millennials and millennials retention and organization. So this question is of great interest, and I think the premise of the question is wrong. And I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but we take for granted that co-ops are the solution and we should attract youth. But to do that, we need to have something that we can offer. And I think the focus should not be that much on values. We hear values. Yes, the young people have the same values as co-ops, so it should be a perfect fit. I don't think we should focus on it, because research clearly identifies that what the young people are looking in an employment is to have impact on the outside world through their a really tangible impact that can be observed. So in my opinion, we should focus more on how to build capacity for cooperatives to properly address issues in the world, whether about sustainable development objectives or to make a difference post-COVID. We know that co-ops can address these questions, these challenges, but we need to develop a model that shows that this solution is efficient, is concrete, and over time, seeing that cooperatives are able to do this, they will want to join co-ops and stay there. And at that moment, the youth will then impose their values on organizations and will create even more that retention. That's just my opinion.
Thank you very much, Etienne. Andre, I'm going to turn back to you, because you've been doing some interesting work with stakeholder organizations, particularly in the BIPOC community. So perhaps you could just share a little bit of the work the CMC has been doing.
Thank you very much, John. Well, we've been having a lot of conversations with leaders of financial and non-financial cooperatives. And one of the key needs that they have right now is getting a better understanding of how to attract and retain younger members members, as you said earlier, who are new Canadians from underrepresented communities. So it's about that, the aging demographic. You know, I'm aging as we speak. And perhaps on the financial cooperative side, it's more of an imminent challenge in the sense that they see their membership base aging and they want to replenish it. But the flip side is that in the middle of COVID, with people reevaluating their own value systems, we should be the coolest thing out there right now. So what steps do we need to take? Is it research? Is the research already out there? But what are the steps that we need to take for that attraction and retention of a more diverse membership in cooperatives?
Thanks very much, Andre. I think in the interest of keeping on our schedule, we should move to the next question, although this is a topic that we could spend a good day discussing because I think it's a key one for all of us. But let's turn now for the moment to the pandemic and the question of what can we do to strengthen supply chains and enhance Principle 6 cooperation amongst cooperatives. So what is being done and what can we do? It's a topic that was discussed at some length by the provincial associations through the summer and the early part of COVID, but let's open it up for some conversation. How can we do that? How can we strengthen the opportunity to bring our supply chains closer to Canada and leverage the strength of our cooperative sector? Here's while you're thinking for a moment, everyone, here's a fun fact or fast fact to share with you from the Government of Canada. So in 2017, 64% of cooperatives received debt financing from credit unions and caisse populaire, 27% from domestic chartered banks, and 20% from a government institution. So interesting to think about how financing and supply chains fit together. Sean Goby from the University of Waterloo had an interesting question in the chat earlier, asking about financing. So Sean, your hand isn't up, but if you're there, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, with the work that you do with cooperatives across the country, particularly in things like financing and business strategy, how do you see us being able to shorten supply chains and capitalize on the potentially positive opportunity that the pandemic has created for us?
Sure, John, happy to. And I mean, I think one of the, I'm going to turn my, do I turn my video on? No, maybe not. I think one of the things that's really interesting that what's happening right now opens up to us is, and this has been brought up before, is the idea of looking at co-op acquisitions and conversions. Because I think as much as what we've seen with COVID has exposed some of the weaknesses in some existing supply chains, you know, those are, this is a very immediate example of something that is a longer term trend that we're going to be hitting with retirement and all of that, and all of what's coming out of that. So then the question is, you know, tied to that, do we have the financing and the capacity to be able to do so, to actually take advantage of that and add depth to the supply chain networks? On the surface, financing shouldn't be that hard, but I do wonder, and this is where the question that John referred to came from, is as I asked about what the impact of low interest rates means to us. Because while that does increase the capacity of co-ops, existing co-ops, to borrow and engage in acquisitions or expansions to fill in those gaps, it also adds a lot of firepower to the private equity space in particular, which is, I think, where a lot of those elements of the supply chain that I've seen crisis are likely to be going. And I'm not sure where the balance is going to fall there. So I'd say that's one piece to consider. A second is that there is a Government of Canada is supporting the Social Finance Fund, which is looking to deploy about $3 to $4 billion in the next within the next decade. So there might be something there, but I don't think we could rely on that entirely. And the third piece I'd say is that, as much as the financing can be a piece with those acquisition and filling those supply chains, I think that there's a lot of the issues that people have already brought up around governance are going to be really critical. Building the capacity of new owners, converted companies into cooperatives. That's still, a real challenge, and it ties into our education system, peer learning systems, a lot of other pieces that folks have referred to. So I think that's where, I think the supply chain piece is one where we can see a lot of those elements actually come together and potentially solve some practical problems, but also might be held back by a lot of those issues that we're facing more generally.
Thanks very much, Sean. And I think it's interesting, there's lots of work being done across the country to shift procurement practices to ensure that cooperatives are a part of the procurement solution, whether it's for governments or corporations. I know we have a couple of our colleagues today who have done some work in this area. So Aaron Morgan, if you're on, I know that you've done quite a lot of work with purchasing cooperatives. If you're there, Aaron, would you like to comment on some of the work you've done?
I don't. I'm not sure that we've done a lot of work with purchasing cooperatives. Can you be more specific in your question, John? I'm not.
What kind of success stories are you seeing, Aaron, with purchasing cooperatives in Ontario?
I think that it's probably best for me to defer this question to Peter, if he's on the call.
Is Peter with us? If not, then we do have a hand raised, and I will go there if Peter's, yep, Peter, go ahead, and then I'm going to, then we have a hand up, which I'm going to recognize.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, no, I think Aaron's correct. We're not so much focused on purchasing cooperatives, but really succession is a big issue for us right now. The whole issue of retiring business owners. So, I mean, we do have purchasing co-ops for sure, but it's not a focus, just to be clear.
All right, thanks, Peter. I'm going to turn next to Senator Motion, who's had her hand up. So, Senator Motion, the floor is yours.
Merci. Je vais faire mon intervention.
Thank you. I'll be speaking French, if I may. As part of the budget statement presented by Ms. Freeland, there's a section that surprised me titled Collective Fiduciaries of Employees. That group met with decision makers last fall, and we had a lot of virtual meetings with these people. And as part of the budget statement that will probably be a reality if it's approved, but as part of that new statement, we talk about collective fiduciaries of employees, or trust being a collective organization in which a trust in the name of employees holds a business. And that's exactly what the cooperative model is doing. And in that statement, we are using, well, the US, the UK, supporting, encouraging collective ownership through that type of agreement. So I think the 2021 budget presented by the government clearly announces its intention to collaborate with stakeholders in order to look into obstacles to creating collective trust of employees. Many employer cooperatives, workers cooperatives talk to me, especially about business succession. So maybe I'm just giving you some information here before, but I think there will be funds available as part of in the coming year for business succession, because I think the federal government wants to avoid too many bankruptcies or closures because of the lack of capital or equity to operate. So there is opportunities here, and maybe this also mirrors a few comments presented by other people here who took the floor
Thank
about
you.
succession.
No, thank you very much, Senator. I think it is very encouraging news that the government is interested in opportunities for us to work together to keep jobs and capital in communities. And I can't think of a better model to do that than the cooperative model. I know we have some hands up, but we do need to move to our next question. And I'm going to turn back to Sylvie for that.
Merci, John.
Thank you, John. There's another big question also that I need to ask you today on practices and co-ops and mutuals. What practice should the sector maybe reduce or reinforce in order to fulfill its full potential? So here we obviously are talking about cooperative values. What would be your answers to this? We sort of alluded to that in our first questions, but now it's more geared towards practices specifically. We have hands up. Gary? I wanted to speak to the previous topic, so you can skip me. Okay, Jason, was it also for your previous question?
Non, c'est pour celle-là.
That's for this one. Regarding factors to strengthen to realize our full potential, I think inter-cooperation needs to be at the center of our practices in the future. We tend to see co-ops acting in silos way too much, and their industries, while they could collaborate to define standards in their industry, rather than to follow the parade with our practices, we could have higher standards that we can set that would be in line with our values, and also encourage local consumption, local supply. I'm thinking about the co-op fédéré under Solio, Desjardins, etc., where we could have agreements between the tens of thousands of employees of these organizations for rebates, specific products, catalogs of products. So I think there could be a lot of innovation that can be made between co-ops, and we tend not to have, unfortunately, that reflex of asking co-ops or to trying to prioritize co-ops in our purchases and whatnot. So I see this in my practice on boards, and I think this will really help us to reinforce it on the longer term and to really help fulfill our potential. Yes, that is also my opinion. When we have inter-cooperation between different sectors, we end up with fantastic things, and it's even better to be a cooperator. So that is the goal, indeed. Renaud Boisvert, your hand up.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? J'ai fait une autre intervention en français, celle-là je la ferai en anglais.
I spoke in French, I'll be speaking in English.
Member in student co-ops in Quebec. I've seen some of the co-ops of which I've been on the board tend to focus on giving the services for cheaper, lowering the price for the students instead of having an avid idea of growth and serving more members and serving a larger member base. And I think that this is a tendency I've seen as well in other consumer co-ops, and other companies tend to just grow exponentially, which I have not seen the co-op sector do. And I think that hunger for growth might be a good thing to reach our full potential.
Merci beaucoup, Renaud, pour cette intervention.
Thank you, Renaud. I received the information that we collaborated in different sectors on social economy. And maybe here I would like to hear Miss Lynn Tam, if you're present with us, on what was done and inter-cooperation with regard to the work between actors in social economy.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Très bien.
OK, non, mais je ne m'attendais pas à ce que. Je pense qu'il y a d'autres mondes sur
Can you
la
hear me?
ligne du
Yes,
mouvement
okay. I think there's
coopératif
other
qui
people on the
sont
line.
plus au
You're
courant de
Nancy
cette
Nam
histoire-là.
Tam.
Puis
So I think other
je fais
people are
référence à
more
Gary
aware of
Lavoie,
this
etc. Mais je
story,
pense
like
que.
Gary Lavoie and whatnot. But
Je pense que ce qui était clé, parce que je regarde un peu le développement des
looking
coopératives
into the
au
development of
Québec comparé au
co-ops
reste du
in
Canada,
Quebec compared with the
et je trouve
rest of
qu'un
Canada, I think that,
en tout cas, à moins que je me
well,
trompe, là, il y
maybe
a
I
la
might be
naissance
mistaken,
de
but
beaucoup plus de nouvelles
a
coopératives.
lot more new
C'est
co-ops
tout
are
l'enjeu
being
de
created.
comment ces coopératives-là
The
se
issue now
sont,
is how did
comment je
these
peux dire, se
cooperatives,
sont
how can I
collées
say,
vraiment beaucoup au territoire. Tu
how
sais,
did they really
il y a eu
stick
en
to their
96-97 la décision du mouvement
locations?
coopératif, mais
You know,
impulsée par les mouvements de développement local, de
push with
mobilisation
local
citoyenne au niveau
development
des
organizations, the
quartiers, des
citizen
villages,
mobilization in towns
d'enraciner
and
ça vraiment très clairement dans le
boroughs to
territoire et
really
développer des
make
groupes de
it
solidarité. Et je pense que
based
c'était un
on
signal
solidarity groups,
aussi de
based on the
démontrer que les
location. Also a
coopératives,
signal that
ils se distinguaient, oui,
co-ops
dans leur forme
also set themselves
démocratique, mais
apart in their
aussi parce que c'est
democratic
vraiment
form,
que
but
l'objectif,
also
c'est pas juste la
because the
coopérative en
objective is
soi,
not
mais
only
c'est
the
de
co-op,
comment on transforme notre
but how we
territoire, comment on fait
transform
partie d'une
our
vision
territory,
haute
how we are
du
part
développement
of a
économique qui est
different
centré
vision
sur l'être humain
of
et sur
economic development
la
centered
réponse aux
on
besoins et aux
human,
aspirations
centered
des
on
collectivités. Alors, je
aspirations,
trouve
ambitions
que dans
of
ce
communities.
domaine-là, et
I think in that
il y a vraiment une
regard,
opportunité
there's a
incroyable pour le
real
développement
tangible
de
opportunity
coopératives,
to develop
soit existantes
co-ops,
ou
either
de nouvelles
existing
à venir,
co-ops
parce
or
qu'on
new
sent, tu
ones,
sais, la
because
crise de la
we
pandémie nous
feel,
a
with the
démontré, puis ça a
pandemic,
été dit, comment les modèles
it was
sur
sad, but
lesquels
how
on
much
s'appuie ne
the
peuvent
models
plus
that
continuer comme
we
ça, l'enjeu écologique,
use
etc.
cannot
Donc, il y a vraiment
we cannot keep using them.
d'enraciner ou de démontrer
So
comment la
there's an
coopérative est un
idea
outil à la
to show
disponibilité de
how
tout le
co-ops
monde
are a
pour
tool at the
pouvoir
disposal of everyone.
transformer notre façon de se développer. Je pense que c'est vraiment une clé de voûte pour
This really is
l'essor du développement coopératif
the
qui est si important pour notre société.
such an important, essential tool for the development of the society. Yes, exactly. Also development with same organization on a location, so inter-cooperation. Yes, and would anybody like to share, Gary?
Est-ce qu'on peut donner la parole à Gary?
Can we give the floor to Gary?
Mais bon, oui, moi, c'est dans le même sens que Nancy.
Okay, has the same sense on development.
Des exemples, je connais plus ceux du Québec, mais j'en ai vu des beaux exemples. Mais on sait c'est quoi la force d'un secteur coopératif organisé, avec une fédération qui vient en support, qui favorise, qui peut, dans le fond, investir dans toute la
Interpreter, sorry, the sound is very bad.
l'intercoopération. Ça, c'est une chose, on a beaucoup développé, mais il y a un constat quand même encore au Canada, au Québec. On est encore dans un développement très sectoriel. On est habitué.
In Quebec, this is a very sector-based development. Whenever we grow, we think about our sector.
On ouvre un café, puis on développe un autre service à l'intérieur de tout ça pour répondre aux besoins de la communauté. Moi, je crois qu'on doit sortir, aller vers un autre paradigme maintenant. Aller vers l'autre paradigme, c'est d'essayer de penser, bon, continuer à favoriser l'intercoopération, c'est la meilleure façon pour nous, dans le monde coopératif, d'aller encore plus loin. Mais il faut aussi commencer à penser à ce qu'on appelle des coopératives intersectorielles. Et on voit en Europe, dans d'autres pays du monde.
You think about intersectoral co-ops, like for example in Europe, these are quite common. This co-ops are involved in different sectors of the economy, and these sectors are complementary among themselves, but we have not really developed that vision in Quebec and in Canada.
travail à faire à ce niveau-là. On a des organisations qui sont capables de le faire.
Organizations able to do this. One example is in the for to develop even further funeral co-ops or cooperatives, also to purchase complementary businesses to them, whether it is on the IT side or whatnot. I think that's one way that we can go, either for funeral homes, the IT side.
Ou le service qu'on a développé pour mieux répondre justement là, aux besoins de nos membres et d'être plus efficace aussi.
C'est bon. Si je fais le lien, en fait, Gary, ce sera un membership multiple. Un membre, tu as une carte.
Multiple membership, if I can summarize, one card for many services.
En ayant acquérir, mettons, un complément à ce qu'elle offre déjà. Mais ça peut être aussi un amoncellement.
So a complementary offer, but also it could be an cooperation with different businesses that could address different needs. So yes, maybe I cut you off, Gary. Did you have anything else?
Ça me permet juste de pouvoir dire aussi un autre élément, c'est que les secteurs coopératifs.
Okay, another point. Different co-op sectors in Canada could also become partners and create new co-ops. For example, Desjardins and forestry co-ops, or complementary businesses that would, I'm thinking about the funeral sector, or but Desjardins already purchases companies not linked to the financial sector. A co-op could see that this is a need for members. For example, one sector and an cooperation is not only about supporting a co-op, but it's also creating business networks. Yes, there's a tangible networking also with funeral homes. There's a meshing also that was created with services at home with families. Obviously, this is a tangible example of intersector services. Gilles Demers also has her hand up.
Oui, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Oui, pardon, excusez.
Yes, please go ahead.
Oui, Julie Demers de la Coop de Solidarité.
Julie Demers from the Côte Nord Solidarity Co-op. We started a little eco shop and educational service on environment, and we are working with the Montréal Nord city. And now I'm wondering, okay, it sounds silly, but is CDRQ known because they are with you today? Answer yes, it's actually a member. Okay. I was wondering if they were present. Well, present. I've seen a few from CDRQ. Okay, I was wondering because we talk about fédéré, we talk about meshing and cooperation, but they helped us to start off. One thing missing is, yes, there's CDRQ, but with other co-ops, I'd like maybe to talk to other co-ops, and we need more to create links, relations. Sometimes we have questions that I hear very well, but it would be great to discuss. Maybe I don't have enough information. It's the first time that I take part in your conference, but maybe finding a way to discuss among co-ops, to have expertise, share experiences, so that'd be great to have a way to discuss among ourselves. Yes, well, we do have such opportunities. Well, we can maybe give you a few ideas here with other co-ops, maybe in the same sector or not. You're in the environment sector. That's interesting, but maybe it can be also interesting to look elsewhere. Okay. So giving the floor to John. Moving forward. So go ahead, John.
Thank you very much, Savit. Let's move to one of the other big questions facing our sector, and one that I think is particularly timely given the recent announcements from the Government of Canada and the budgets, and also from the Biden administration, which will inevitably have spillover effects into Canada. So we want to spend a few minutes looking at what cooperatives across Canada are doing to align with the vision of a green economy or to activate the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And how we are collectively responding as a sector to the impact of climate change in a sector that is very diverse, from housing to oil and gas to every sector of the economy. So what are the great stories that we're doing there? I know of a few, but I would very much love to hear from some of our participants about the work that you're doing in your cooperatives. I know that Daryl Reed has been doing some interesting work with his Green Campus Cooperative Corporation that he spoke about earlier. So Daryl, if you're still on, perhaps would you like to make a few comments about the work that you're doing?
Hi, John, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Daryl.
Good. So our cooperative is a fair trade cooperative, which means that we have links to producer cooperatives in the South. So we're basically, through the fair trade network, we are able to establish cooperative value chains. But not just us, but all those Southern producers are organized in national and regional producer associations in Latin America and Africa and Asia. And in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, we should be engaging with them more systematically because they're already doing a lot of work in terms of what they're able to do. And we as a cooperative can piggyback on that, because the cooperative in India, for example, from which we procure cotton, they've done tremendous work in terms of, and it's all organic and it's all fair trade. So you can imagine they're covering a wide range of the Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's around water, whether it's around education, all sorts of different things. For our part, we've tried to use some of that information to develop sustainable accounting and social accounting measures. So we can sort of evaluate on the basis of the amount of garments we've imported, how we and they together are able to contribute to a range of different sustainable development goals. But that doesn't only help us, because when we sell to universities who are also very interested in doing these things, they can also say as the final consumers how they're helping to do this as well. So when we're looking at sustainable development goals, we need to be able to look along our value chains and see how, especially by having cooperative value chains, that gives us a real advantage in understanding how we contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we also have our own sort of social and environmental accounting processes done or could do, I think we can really be leaders in doing this, both for ourselves, but also for those other organizations that we work with, whether they're further down the value chain or whether they're end users or whether they're partners in some other way. So there's lots of interesting work going on and lots more that we could do as well.
Thank you, Joe. I think that's an excellent point about the opportunity to embed sustainability and also sustainable accounting in our businesses, in our cooperatives as a source of, we would call it competitive advantage, but I'd like to call it cooperative advantage. Something that could really transform how our sector operates in a scene nationally and even internationally. Président Boisvert, you have your hand up. Please, the floor is yours.
L'intervention sera relativement courte, mais
It will be brief. Anything that we are not measuring or taking any clear actions to determine objectives to measure, we will not be able to meet the results that we want. I noticed that many of the co-ops that I work with are not including a summary of the actions they take to measure their environmental impact if we are not transparent to our members with regard to the efforts we put into sustainable goals. Well, we tend to do less.
Thank you, Renaud. I think that's an excellent point. Again, it was Peter Drucker who said, you measure what matters. And climate change does matter a great deal. So it's an important point that we need to consider how we embed that in our reporting. And there are a couple of very good examples that we're seeing in the chat from Wendy Carruthers at Co-operators, the work they've done with their integrated sustainability reports, and also Solio, their corporate responsibility report. I also know that there has been some excellent work done by the University of St. Mary's. And if we have a moment, I will call on St. Mary's just to give us a bit of an overview of what they're doing. But first, I'd like to go to Gary Lavoie, who has his hand up. So Gary, over to you, please.
Merci. J'ai vu quelques personnes.
Thank you. I saw this, a few people said that they couldn't hear me well when I'm speaking, so don't hesitate to let me know if that's still the case. Okay, on question number 6, I think we have a fantastic example in Quebec, and that's a model I talked previously about the funeral homes, co-ops, and all that sector. For now, in 10 years, the Federation, in consultation with all the funeral homes, have established a sustainable development framework that led to many directors being involved. And this is a model that is inspiring in other sectors. And if you want to mobilize the whole sector and to address this issue, talking about climate change here, funeral homes in Quebec now are known as a place where, and talking about even with young people, if you talk about funeral home, maybe obviously they won't be using the services that much, but you know, with one stakeholder mentioned it, when we can make the connection between a co-op and an issue they care about. We know that the environment also for that generation is important. When they are able to create connections between a co-op and their needs, well, that's a winning formula to show how relevant a co-op is as a tool in society to progress. So yes, funeral home co-ops is one way to draw inspiration from. They have an annual report that mentioned this. Also, some funeral homes offset their emissions and really are able to assess in their model the impact that they have in their activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And again, I think that's a very important point.
Gary.
That we've
C'est un
got
point intéressant ici.
some great stories to tell, but
Nous avons
also
d'excellentes histoires à raconter, mais on doit se souvenir aussi que le rapport des changements sur les changements climatiques Le travail plus vert est une source d'avantage, encore une fois, pour le domaine, pour la rétention, pour l'attraction, pour la promotion du modèle. C'est important. On a le temps pour un dernier participant.
Hand up. So, Hélène, over to you, please.
Oui, donc je pense pas qu'on a tant de participants de
Yes, I don't think we have that many forestry co-ops or housing co-op participants here, but because I know them, I'd like to talk about the great initiatives, sometimes things that they've been doing for over 10 years. For example, forestry co-ops with all that's reforestation, investment in biomass, and innovation with regard to heating. There are new models in the housing co-ops and ownership co-ops, and here in Waterville with ecological housing. How can we build new housing co-op and residential with green buildings so that are green? I heard somebody in a environmental co-op. We don't really have a federation. We don't really have any way to maybe talk about those co-ops in that sector. And around Warwick, so, there's a farming co-op. And Colette Lebel could talk about this. She obviously knows the project much more, but really have any impact environmentally. Yes, biomethanization. Yes, thank you, Colette. Gary really said what I had to say with regard to involvement of youth and the environment. Just like it said mentioned, it's not how we interest young people in co-ops, but what are their concerns? And environment is a concern. Now, how can co-ops address this need? That really is important to the new generation. So co-ops need to look into that last universal co-op, that is engagement, participation. That's part of our DNA.
Thank you very much, Hélène. We do in fact have time for one more question. Marc Solio from, Marc Poisson had his hand up from Solio. So Marc, if you would like the floor.
Oui, merci. En fait, je constate que ma collègue, Colette.
See, my colleague Colette has mentioned it. Now is the third edition of our corporate responsibility or our responsibility statement and report. So as mentioned by Colette, we have chosen 6 sustainable development goals by UN out of the 17 that were developed. And so for us, that's really something that we like to highlight. I've seen Colette's comments, so sorry for being redundant here, but I just wanted to mention this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc. And I think you
Merci, Marc, et je pense que vous avez fait un point excellent ici.
Sustainable development goals are a much broader vision for a sustainable economy and a sustainable society. And again, when we think about the work of the cooperative community across Canada, we again are very much poised to be a solution to advancing those goals for all Canadians. So I'd like to close our discussion on green and sustainable development there and pass the mic back to my colleague Sylvie.
Oui, alors, on serait rendu, en fait, je parlais en français.
Okay, yes, so now that would be time to the Q&A period. So we can ask questions on either issues we have talked about or more broad issues with regard to co-ops and mutuals, obviously. You have the choice either to raise your hand or to write your questions in the chat. So there we have it. Maybe Benoit, you have your hand up, so the floor is yours.
gentil, je vais être juste sûr et bref, là.
Yes, I will be brief. First, I want to allude to the health crisis and the upheaval that will follow, the big changes that are coming, obviously. CMC, is there a place to reflect on the place that cooperation could have, especially after this crisis, where we'll have business succession and we'll have to deal with evolution in companies and digital, everything? Because we've talked about today, it's a sort of a large buffet with a lot of choice, but are we really paying attention on what comes after this crisis and the place of cooperation after? So it's really a big question mark. Okay, so a question to John or André, obviously, if any of you would like to take the floor. André? Yes, obviously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Benoit. This is a question that we are addressing with our members throughout Canada openly with provincial federations in Canada. And we are discussing also with the federal government, with which there is some key offices that we are communicating regularly with. This touches upon subsectors of the economy, labor market. This also deals with funding, as mentioned today. And that's really the reason to have a discussion today. We wanted to hear from you from across the country to implement the next steps with regard to our discussion with the government of Canada. We have a role to play for a sustainable economy. It's very clear. If we look at the large needs in Canada, the directions, whether for care for the elderly, for childcare and daycares, after vaccination, we hope, attraction and retention, because before the pandemic, we have the very low employment rate. With the challenges that we have, we probably also will have a low employment rate because of population aging of the population, right? So all those topics have been targeted by CMC. So I'll just conclude by thanking you for this question and all of your comments today that really help us. John, would you like to add to this?
Well, thank you, Sylvie. I think Andre summarized it very well. Benoit, we've done a lot of work since the start of the pandemic to think about what happens after the pandemic. It's very much part and parcel of the discussions that we've been having at the board about the strategic vision for CMC. In the summer, through discussions with the network of provincial and territorial associations, we sent a letter to the Government of Canada, which was essentially advocating that the cooperative sector must be at the table as the government plots or determines how we come back through the pandemic. And in that letter, we talked a lot about the things that the cooperative sector is uniquely poised to do, such as shortening supply chains, maintaining capital in communities, keeping jobs in communities. So Benoit, you can rest assured that this is very much part and parcel of the work we're going to be continuing to do within the board, with CMC, and with our partners across the country over the coming months. And again, you mentioned succession. I would just cite to the work that we've been doing with the University of Waterloo Institute for Social Resilience and Innovation, with Sean Goby and his colleagues, and again with many organizations across the country, where it's really a whole of team effort, if I can put it that way, to think about how the cooperative sector builds a stronger economy from coast to coast to coast. So we'll continue that work, and you'll continue to hear the updates as the months unfold.
Merci, John. Il y a Hélène qui a levé la main.
Thank you, John. Hélène. Yes, Benoit is first, I'm second, right? We always follow each other. So I just wanted to congratulate CMC for your discussion today, but also to mention one thing. In Quebec, we are very privileged with regard to the governmental understanding of the co-op model, but I don't really feel that same type of support federally with regard to the federal programs with funding programs. So obviously, I speak with one of your employees who is very helpful, but we feel in Quebec it's really privileged, but elsewhere in Canada, we really need to do some work to be recognized. We say we are 8,000 co-ops in Canada. There's 3,000 of them in Quebec. So I hope that with time in provinces and elsewhere in Canada, that co-op development really becomes part of government policies. And I would go further by saying, why not a Canadian investment program that already shown a lot of a proven track record in Quebec. So yes, I'd like to hear you on what can be done outside for representation on the federal level. Danielle Brunette, I think you have something. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sylvie.
Hélène,
Thank you,
je
Hélène.
partager des bonnes nouvelles.
I simply would like to share good news on that topic that we share whenever there are problems with access. We heard just a few minutes before, we heard that thanks to representation, can export SMEs for SMEs has been open now to co-ops, has been signed in that last few days by the minister. So to do this work, I welcome you to share obstacles. Maybe sometimes it's not by a lack of desire or willingness or bad intentions. It's simply that people developing programs are not really aware of what a co-op is and its great obstacles. So we will still be advocating for co-ops. We'll also continue our representations, but with the wealth of programs at the federal level, obviously we appreciate when people like Hélène can share with us potential obstacles they are facing. So I hope, Hélène, this helps to address your question, also sharing good news here. Thank you, Danielle. Gary? Yes, thank you. My question now, I'd like to know how you react when you notice that in the federal budget, there is a comment on collective trusts. Was CMC aware of this? Do you have the intention of taking action with the federal government so that collective trusts, because it's very much similar to co-ops, but it's not exactly the same that we are used to seeing, that we know?
Comme une coop de travail, mais je ne vais pas rentrer là-dedans, mais est-ce que CMC a une stratégie?
So basically, do you have a strategy so that if funds are available associated to this, then co-ops are aware of this and take advantage of it? Because I know that collective trusts are very much active in acquiring businesses that can be converted. For me, that's a very significant issue, as mentioned previously. We need to take action if we want to play a role in intergenerational transfer for thousands of businesses across Canada. Yes, Andre or Daniel, maybe? Well, Andre, yes. Yes, my question will be yes, yes, and yes, Mr. Lavoie. I prepared a report on the federal budget, very much in depth. We appreciate Senator Motion also, who's a great champion. To touch up on the previous question, I've been in this role for close to 4 years. And when we started to advocate at the Hill, we immediately saw that there is a need to present very tangible data on the potential of the sector with regard to employment and GDP. So we conducted a national study and we came back to the federal showing how financial and non-financial co-ops represent 3.4% of GDP in Canada and close to 200,000 jobs. So through employment and GDP, we're bigger than the auto manufacturing sector. Through these representations, we're able also to have a lot of high-level conversations with different offices, with finance, with the Institute of Economy and Development, Employment and Social Development Canada. With regard to this, we've gotten great results. Daniel mentioned one. I went and started with advocacy. Regional development offices did not know co-ops and mutuals in Canada. We met with the federal government, and now we have a training program for frontline employees at regional development offices. So this was not open to cooperators, and now it is. We asked Statistics Canada if they could produce annual data now on the cooperatives in Canada, because the federal government does that on different sectors in the economy. Now will be the first year where Statistics Canada produces data on all non-financial cooperatives in Canada. Deferred tax and tax revenue on cooperative shares. Well, we made representation with Agropur with a lot of members since it was due last year. In partnership, the door is open and we have extended the program now for another 3 years. Through these types of discussions like today, we can hear your concerns and we are always paying attention and listening to our members. Thank you. Very quickly, if you have questions that you didn't have time to ask, we see that we will be concluding very soon. So we would like to hear your concerns, your ideas with everything that we have to do at CMC to promotion of co-ops. So don't hesitate to send your questions. I think all the team is available for this. So André, if you want to help us close the session.
Pardon, Sylvie, je regardais quelque chose dans le chat.
I'm sorry, I was reading something in chat, Sylvie. What does André have to do? André needs to conclude the session. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that. I got distracted by the chat. See, you have a lot of interesting messages and I did not want to miss any of them. Thank you, Sylvie and John, for being with us, for moderating this session, for your leadership. If CBC needs a succession or new hosts for, well, don't hesitate, but I mean, we still need your help, so.
And John, for facilitating our conversation today and for your continued leadership. I'd also like to thank our board of directors and my colleagues at CMC who cooperate every day to advance the interests of our members. We're a small but determined team and we have your interests at heart every day. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for being a part of this conversation to build Canada's cooperative economy. Your comments verbally in the chat were all very much appreciated. We're going to be sending out a recording of today's conversation so that you can share it with your colleagues and perhaps draw further insights from it. You will be receiving a short survey following this event via email. We'd ask that you kindly just take a few minutes, and that's all it will take. Will be 1-2 minutes tops, but we'd really like your feedback on the event. The event did cover a lot of ground, but we're going to continue the conversation at CMC's National Virtual Congress, June 14th to the 16th. We'd love to have you all virtually there with us. Hopefully next year we'll be able to meet some of you there. In addition, if you'd like to share your expertise, by the way, by participating in our legislative or governance leadership tables, you're most welcome. The nominations are open. On behalf of CMC, thank you again for your participation and for helping us move towards a more cooperative economy. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée.